Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on News 6 World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Donald Trump said he expects to meet Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Meanwhile, interim leader Delcy Rodriguez rejected Trump's claims of U.S. control, insisting Venezuela remains sovereign. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian drone strikes has hit Kyiv just before midnight of Friday, killing 4 people including an emergency medic and injuring at least 19 people, with 14 hospitalized. Military administration head reports buildings and critical infrastructure were damaged as well. U.S. Assistant Secretary for East Asia Michael DeSombre has said that the United States will provide $45 million in assistance to Cambodia and Thailand to support implementation of the Kuala Lumpur Peace Accords as part of the President Donald Trump's peace brokering efforts. This comes after recent border clashes that killed at least 101 people. According to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, India's trade deal with the United States stalled after Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not make a call to President Donald Trump to seal the agreement, leading to Washington doubling tariffs on Indian goods to 50%, including a 25% penalty over India's Russian oil purchases. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has urged Europe to take Donald Trump seriously on Greenland after Washington floated buying the Danish territory and did not rule out military action to secure it. Israeli strikes killed at least 13 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip on Thursday after the Israeli military said it targeted a site following failed rocket launch, with medics reporting that 4 people, including children, were killed in a 10th strike in Khan Yunis, while Hamas claims more than 1,100 Israeli ceasefire violations since October. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will visit Japan on Tuesday to meet Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi in Nara. The summit will include discussions and a dinner on regional and global issues. U.S. President Donald Trump said he held a great meeting with Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan, calling him very successful and praising the U.S. government's 10% stake in the chipmaker. Intel's shares jumped in extended trading, up about 75% since the CHIPS Act investment. Now with this, we start this hour with U.S. tensions over U.S. President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown has escalated across the United States after a second shooting involving federal immigration officers in just 2 days, deepening divisions between state and federal authorities. Protests have intensified in Minnesota after an immigration and customs enforcement officer fatally shot a 37-year-old mother during an operation in Minneapolis. State and federal officials have given sharply different accounts of what happened, with state investigators saying they were shut out of the federal probe. Just a day later in Oregon, a U.S. Border Patrol agent shot and wounded a man and a woman in Portland. Local officials said they could not independently verify the federal government's version of the events and urged calm. Democratic mayors and governors in both states are calling for federal officers to be withdrawn, saying the deployments into Democratic-led cities are fueling unrest. Civil rights groups have also condemned the enforcement actions as provocative. Federal authorities maintain that both cases vehicles were used as weapons against agents. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister, joins us live from Dubai. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now looking
Good to see you.
Thank you. Now looking at all the developments that happened around ICE agents, involving ICE agents in U.S., what's happening with U.S.? What's your analysis on this escalating situation with ICE agents?
Well,
Yes.
I think you've asked the right question. That should be the headline of the program. What is happening? What is going on? Because the use of ICE officers at a local level is causing alarm and concern from the mayors of particular cities, but also more importantly, from the governors of state. These states have their own law enforcement, and indeed the local mayor has his or her own enforcement. So when you have a situation where the federal government sends in agents and it ends up with, as we've just heard, shootings of individuals, this becomes a matter of extreme concern to the public and to the state governments. So it is something that is only resolvable if you sit down and talk to the White House. But as we have seen, apart from the mayor of New York, the president of the United States has not managed to meet any of the other mayors involved, and therefore the situation has become very tense indeed.
And how do you think this latest incidents will be affecting the debate over federal immigration enforcement versus state or local governance and community safety?
I think it's going to worry. I think it's going to worry the authorities greatly. They would not have expected there to be such a reaction. The trouble is, when you make a mistake, you tend to want to admit it before there is an inquiry and before matters escalate. In this particular case, both the President and Vice President J.D. Vance have said no mistake was made, even though it's quite clear it's on video. So there are big issues to do with the way in which deniability and plausibility enter the discussion. And this is certainly not going to go away. And it matters more, in a sense, to the people of the United States than does, for example, the situation in Venezuela, because that's a faraway country. If you've got a shooting in somewhere like Minneapolis, that is, for them, down the road.
All right. Thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Vaz. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus to US and Russia. US President Donald Trump has indicated that he is prepared to let the last remaining US-Russia nuclear arms control treaty to expire, declining a Russian offer to voluntarily extend its limits. Trump has said that if the New START treaty expires, it expires, adding that the United States would pursue a better agreement. The treaty, signed in 2010, caps US and Russian deployments of strategic nuclear warheads and is due to expire on 5th February. Arms control advocates warn that once the treaty lapses, the world's two largest nuclear powers could begin deploying war weapons beyond existing limits, further weakening the global arms control framework. Trump has said any replacement agreement should include China, a proposal Beijing has rejected, saying its nuclear arsenal is far smaller than those of the United States and Russia. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister, joins us live from Dubai. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how dangerous is this situation, and why is Trump's attitude toward this treaty very relaxed?
Well, I think the worry is we reached a stage in world affairs where both of the big superpowers, Russia and America, agreed that it was better to spend money on their own people rather than spend money on weapons that are never going to be used. However, it's now likely that they decided, well, America has decided, there's no point in having a deal because to them, everything is interconnected. A deal on this would mean somehow getting a deal on Ukraine. And the Russians are not prepared to do a deal on Ukraine because Ukraine is not prepared to make any changes to the way in which it's conducting the war with Russia. So that's why this is coming up at this particular stage. And the Americans are very reluctant to renew. They're trying to put pressure on the Russians to settle in Ukraine.
So, now that President Trump has said that he's confident, or he at least seems confident that, I have a better deal in mind. But we don't know if that's concrete, right? So in case he is eyeing to add China into this or a better deal as per him, do you think that China will agree
I don't know. I think that we are in the stage where we cannot predict what is going to happen between these countries. In a sense, it's easier to predict what Putin is going to do, President Putin, and President Xi, than it is Donald Trump, because he seems to change the policy every single day. So I don't know the answer to that question. It's not something that one can possibly define, given what we've seen over the last few years.
Yes, 100%. And how do you think this will further, this no treaty situation will further affect international nuclear stability, and what other countries might be seeing this opportunity to arm up, add more into their arms? Do you think that maybe there will be other countries eyeing this situation?
I think a lot of other countries who would want to use this as an opportunity to give their neighbours a good battering will see this as a way of increasing their arms expenditure. You ask which countries? Any country in the world that is in dispute with its neighbour, any country in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, even the European countries, Denmark now facing the possibility of an attack from the United States. Any of these countries, the world has become unmanageable in terms of predictions and expenditure. The one thing that is certain is that the biggest beneficiaries of what we have seen since the re-election of Donald Trump, number one, definitely is going to be the arms dealers, who are going to treat this as a bonanza. They've never had it so good. Secondly, anyone who has shares in oil companies, especially American oil companies, are going to be very happy. So these are the two biggest beneficiaries. I think there are others, but those are the ones we can identify. The world has changed. That's why you're talking about this every single day. It's good for the news companies such as yours. You're never going to be bored for the next 2.5 years because of what Donald Trump is going to do. But for sure, the world is a more dangerous place because of what is going on.
That's for sure. And lastly, this potential treaties lapse, how do you think this will be affecting U.S.'s credibility even after, Trump leaves office, if he does?
Well, when he leaves office, everything that he's done is be reversed by the next president. If it's a Democrat, if it's a Republican who wants to serve 2 terms, they will also be having some nuances. And therefore, to that extent, this is a short-term thing. He's got 2.5 years left. Well, to be honest, he's got until November. If he loses control of the House of Representatives, then, of course, it all changes. So much of what he's doing is to do with the midterm elections, but he's doing it in the wrong way.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Raz. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move the focus on to Middle East. U.S. envoy Tom Barrack has welcomed a ceasefire in the city of Aleppo in Syria after days of deadly fighting between the army and Kurdish fighters forced thousands of civilians to flee. Syria's defense ministry has announced a ceasefire after 3 days of clashes between government forces and Kurdish fighters in the northern city of Aleppo that has displaced thousands of people. The deadly standoff between Damascus and Kurdish authorities, who have registered integrating into the central government, is a major challenge for Syrian President Ahmed Al-Sharaa, who has pledged to unite the country after 14 years of civil war. Now we welcome back Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister, joins us live from Dubai. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for staying with us. Now looking at this, what more can you tell us about the situation with Syria? And do you think that this, Ahmed Al-Sharaa, how successful is he from your analysis to include the minorities?
Well, I think that this is good news. Anything that brings about a ceasefire, especially in a country like Syria, is to be welcomed. I think now is the time to have those discussions. the president of Syria needs to include. He needs to learn from the mistakes of the Assad family, and he needs to bring communities together. How much of this is because of a dispute between communities? How much is interference by countries from outside who feel it's in their interest to destabilize Syria? Who knows? But what is very clear is that progress needs to be made to try and include more communities, more groups in this discussion, because that is the best way one can move forward.
Right. And do you think that he is what do you think is U.S. envoy Tom Barak's role over there right now?
Well, America is the most powerful nation on earth. America has the most money to spend, and therefore when America gets involved, one has to take it seriously. America is only stepping in because the United Nations has lost all credibility. The UN Secretary General, I'm afraid, does not get on a plane whenever there is a dangerous area and try and bring groups together. He seems to stay in New York. And that's because when you choose these international people to run these organizations, it's always a compromise. No country wants a strong and dynamic leader. I think you've got to probably look back 10 to 15 years before you find someone with the charisma, the ability, and the sheer common sense to drive communities together. So we have to rely on these special envoys. Nobody else is doing any of the work.
And do you think that America is being effective over there in regards to this situation that's unfolding?
We can't comment. We don't know. We have no idea what America's offering. If America's involved, it's usually offering one side something or the other. And as you can see with Venezuela, it's got to be in the interests of America. I'm not sure what their interest is, particularly in Syria. It can't be oil. It must be something else, and let's see how it develops.
And going back to just Syrian president, who is Ahmad Al-Sharaa now, do you think America has? What do you think is the interest of America in putting him in charge? And also, he hasn't directly been put in by U.S., but just him getting a lot of support from U.S. is of course helping him. What do you think is their motive?
We need to ask the Americans why they're there, what they intend to do there. I would imagine it's to put pressure on the Russians. All these disputes are interconnected. If you do an organizational organogram to show why people are doing anything, you will see America right in the center of that, trying to control what's going on. It'll be good to have an explanation, but as you know, Donald Trump at the moment has his hands full.
Yes, interesting. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Keith Vaz for joining us today and sharing that insight from Dubai. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has reiterated that the settlement of Taiwan issues is purely China's internal affair and brooks no external interference. This response followed recent comments by U.S. President Donald Trump, who stated in an interview that any military action regarding Taiwan is ultimately up to Chinese President Xi Jinping. Spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry and the Taiwan Affairs Office has emphasized that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China and that the Chinese people alone should decide how to resolve the issue. Trump's comments came after a major U.S. military operation in Venezuela, which led some analysts to speculate on whether it set a precedent for territorial actions by other powers like China. Trump denied the situations were analogous, arguing that Taiwan did not pose the same threat to China as Venezuela did to U.S. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Stefan Nagy. He's a professor of politics and international studies at the International Christian University in Tokyo and senior fellow and China project lead at the Macdonald-Laurie Institute. Joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, do you agree that China won't be, or do you disagree that China will not be eyeing the situation, what has been done by U.S. towards Venezuela?
So Venezuela and the U.S. actions against Venezuela don't really play well when it comes to Taiwan. They're very different situations. Taiwan has a very robust society, robust civil society, a strong institutions, and of course strong deterrence that it's built up over the decades. Um, they also have the Taiwan Strait, which is very difficult to cross and engage in some kind of military conflict. But I think what's most important for us to be thinking about is that this is certainly not a green light for China, and China understands that an attack or forced reunification using military might on Taiwan would result in not a regional war but a global conflict that would have huge repercussions on the Chinese economy. We think up to 10% of global GDP would be damaged by a conflict across the Taiwan Straits. In concrete numbers, that's 10 to 12 trillion US dollars. And of course, the supply chains and production networks that bring prosperity to China would be destroyed. So generally, we think that China is not thinking about a forced reunification. It's the last choice amongst many choices that China would like would prefer, understanding that a conflict over Taiwan would be extremely damaging for the Chinese economy, but of course that would have impacts on regime stability.
Is there any other motive that could be stopping China in doing the same towards Taiwan other than the GDP or economy?
Well, today the Chinese economy is largely stagnating. I mean, there is some positive growth within the economy, but at the aggregate level, it is facing a really, really difficult period. And Secretary General Xi Jinping, his biggest worry is certainly not what's happening with Taiwan or what's happening in the East China or South China Sea. His biggest concern is the Chinese economy, which has really moved into a position that I think it's moving into long-term stagnation, which is going to have incredibly destabilizing effects on the domestic economy, great pressure on the one-party system that he heads, and they need to figure out how to deal with and keep the economy somewhat stable. An attack on Taiwan or any other place within the region would certainly further destabilize the domestic economy and again cause those problems in the political system, potentially in causing a regime change. And this is something that the one-party state does not want.
Right. And Professor, how is this news covered in Japan? Does Japan understand that, you mentioned, rightfully mentioned that China has different interests, and China's issue or biggest issue right now is not Taiwan's and China's reunification, but it's the stagnant economy?
The Japanese analysts are quite clear that what's happened in Venezuela does create a hypocritical position for not only the United States, but many countries that have promoted a rules-based order. On the one hand, I think that many countries are relieved and happy about President Maduro being relieved from power. He was running a narco state. He was involved with criminal activities within Venezuela and causing a huge destabilization process within South America. And again, contributing to the fentanyl and other challenges associated with drugs in the United States. So I think they're relieved, but at the same time, it creates huge problems in terms of that rules-based rhetoric that Japan and Canada, Australia, and many other middle powers have been arguing that they need a rules-based order to preserve peace and stability in the broader region. If the United States can do something like this that goes against the rules, the question is can Russia or China or India or other powers do the same thing? And this doesn't bode well for peace and stability in the region when great powers do what they want and middle powers and small powers endure what they must.
Right. I was talking about rule-based order, if US is allowed to do this, and we know that US will be, of course, having a double standard when it comes to other countries doing something similar, who do you think is capable to enforce such rule-based order now?
Well, there's a regional approach to thinking about a rules-based order, and when we think about the Indo-Pacific region, the United States has alliance partners within the region, and those partners themselves are quite significant powers, as many have written about, whether it's South Korea, Japan, Australia, Singapore. They all have significant self-defense forces or militaries that allow them to protect themselves against a great power aggression. And they're not pushovers. So I think as we think about enforcing the rules-based order, we have to think about it at a sub-regional level rather than at a global level. The United States still is head and shoulders above other powers globally, but in a regional area we see more parity, and in particular when we compare China and the United States in the Indo-Pacific. The United States still is ahead of the game in terms of comprehensive power, but China has an ability to concentrate enormous amount of resources that give it a certain edge when we think about the South China Sea or the Taiwan Straits. It's complicated, it's nuanced, and I don't think we can really argue for who can enforce the rules-based order, but rather who can disturb or unbalance the current rules-based order in a way that creates more regional instability.
Right, and what more can you tell us about this ongoing issue? How is this unfolding from your analysis?
Well, when we look at the countries looking at the United States' actions towards Venezuela, they're first thinking, what does this mean in terms of spheres of influence? Is President Trump and his new national security really only focusing on the Western Hemisphere? And will they leave or abandon the alliance system that exists within the Indo-Pacific, in particular for Japan, South Korea, and the Taiwan Protection Act, which is a form of protection against China in the case that China engages in some kind of forced reunification. So there's questions about abandonment. At the same time, they're looking at the United States and seeing if there's really any concrete changes in their investments within the region in terms of the military exercises within the region and cooperation with different self-defense forces and militaries within the region. And they're looking at diplomacy. And I think what they've come to the conclusion is that the United States' position within the Indo-Pacific region is strongest with partners that have demonstrated a track record of investing in their own protection and in the United States to help the United States make America great again. So that's Japan, South Korea, Australia, to a certain degree, Singapore, and the Philippines, and those countries that are less reliable and less involved in investing in their own security and helping the United States in terms of burden sharing are in a position where they feel less secure about the United States being anchored in the region. Over the long term, I think it's quite clear that China is the systemic challenge within the Indo-Pacific region for all countries within the region, but also the United States. If China is successful in dominating and becoming the regional hegemon within the Indo-Pacific, this would be against the United States' interests and create a risk for the United States. And I think based on that logic, the United States under President Trump, President Vance, or potentially a new president, they will all have the same logic with regards to investing in U.S. national security through strong partnerships with forward-leaning countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, to maximize U.S. security within the region through strong alliance partnerships.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Stefan Nagy for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to India and U.S. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said that India's trade deal with the United States stalled because Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not call U.S. President Donald Trump to finalize the agreement. The negotiations collapsed last year and Trump doubled tariffs on Indian goods to 50%. including a 25% levy linked to India's purchases of Russian oil. Lutnick has said the deal was ready, but both sides were uncomfortable and the call never happened. The tariff threat has pushed the Indian rupee to record lows and increased investor concerns. India still seeks a compromise tariff rate, but progress on a new deal remains elusive. Now we move on to our next news. General Motors has said that it would take a $6 billion charge to unwind some electric vehicle investments, the latest car company to pull back from EVs in response to the Trump administration's policies and fading demand. The charge stems from reducing its planned EV production and the fallout on the supply chain, GM has said in a regulatory filing, and comes weeks after rival Ford Motor announced a similar but much bigger charge. Most of GM's write-down of $4.2 billion cash charge is related to contract cancellations and settlements with suppliers. GM has said the write-down would not affect its U.S. lineup of roughly a dozen EV models, which is the industry's broadest offering of battery-powered vehicles. That's all we have time for. Keep watching News6 World for more news updates from around the world.